Hi, it's me again, Dr. Miller, and I wanted to do a little bit more work with you with Beloved. Um, this is about 20 something pages into the book. I didn't want to get too far into it just in case. I mean, if I don't help you really between pages 1 and 200, that's not really that helpful. You're sort of adrift for a couple hundred pages. Um, but one of the things that we talk about frequently when we talk about literature is gender. And some of the ways we can talk about that aren't always straightforward. Um, and one of the things that people have been talking about a lot more in more recent literary analysis is masculinity. And it's complicated. I mean, certainly masculinity is something we see talked about today, whether you think about how people talk about sports, the military, all these kinds of things, power, politics, all that stuff. It's never without that part of the conversation, whether you want it to or not. And Toni Morrison is always acutely aware of how women are gendered, how masculinity comes across, and when people talk about enslavement and the history of race in America, there is also a gendered component to that. Often, stereotypically, especially if we're talking the 1800s, masculinity was involved with providing for your family, being the head of a household, etc. That is something where, if you were enslaved, that was frequently denied to you. And so we're going to start with this little quote from Baby Suggs here and get a little bit further. So Baby Suggs decides to kind of split hairs here in an interesting way. A man ain't nothing but a man, said Baby Suggs, but a son, well now, that's somebody. And so you get this kind of strange turn of phrase that then the narrator and Morrison indirectly explain. It made sense for a lot of reasons, because in all of Baby's life, as well as Setha's own, so both of them were enslaved. Baby Suggs had her freedom bought by her son, Hallie, because he worked years and years of working all day on Sunday in order to buy her freedom. As well as Setha's own, men and women were moved around like checkers. Anybody Baby Suggs knew, let alone loved, who hadn't run off or been hanged, got rented out, loaned out, bought up, brought back, stored up, mortgaged, won, stolen, or seized. So look at man as a factor. Your relationship to masculinity is going to be different. This idea that a man is temporary, but someone to whom you've given birth, that's a different kind of relationship, as she mentions. So Baby's 8 children had 6 fathers. What she called the nastiness of life was the shock she received upon learning that nobody stopped playing checkers just because the pieces included her children. Hallie she was able to keep the longest, 20 years, a lifetime. Given to her, no doubt, to make up for hearing that her 2 girls, neither of whom even had their adult teeth, so whatever, they're 5 years old maybe, kids start losing their teeth when they're 5, 6, 7, were sold and gone, and she had not been able to wave goodbye. To make up for coupling with a straw boss for 4 months in exchange for keeping her 3rd child, a boy, with her, so she tries to sleep with this man to have, in order to keep her child with her, only to have him traded for lumber in the spring of the next year, and to find herself pregnant by the man who promised not to and did. That child she could not love, and the rest she would not. God take what he would, she said. And he did, and he did, and he did, and then gave her Hallie, who gave her freedom when it didn't mean a thing. So, I mean, this as a biography of Baby Suggs is extraordinary when we read it, but it also would not be surprising if it wasn't extraordinary of someone in her position. It is hard to have, I'm sorry, my computer's being a little weird. The sacrifices, the tough decisions she had to make. This is why a man ain't nothing but a man is her comment, because, when she tried to trust people, betrayal was as common as anything. She kept trying to hang on to her children, and only one she succeeded in hanging on to. And 20 years would have been incredible. I mean, he would have been an adult. That's, that itself is amazing. And that he worked his way to give her freedom. But unfortunately, she had lived so much by then that it became very different to her versus, if it had been earlier on, she could have lived a whole second life. And then comparing her to Sethe, she had the amazing luck of 6 whole years of marriage to that somebody's son who had fathered every one of her children. This is something that during the time when Morrison was writing, certainly during this time, this is the thing that is not commonplace in her world, but it is commonplace now. It wouldn't be surprising if you met someone who had been married for 6 years and had 2 children with the person. Like, that's not, it wouldn't even necessarily raise an eyebrow. Yet she was the incredibly lucky person, and Baby Suggs' experience is more ordinary, even though when we hear this today, it seems like it's the other way around. So when we think about how power and gender and masculinity work, it's almost an inversion, where things are kind of flipped upside down, because you have completely different ways of thinking about choice and opportunity, and what is supposed to keep people in line. So yeah. Oh, that's, there we go. That's not doing too well with the PDF anyway. But yeah, so here is Sethe and Hallie's marriage again. So this is the way they talk about getting married, which is what today, and when people have the gift of choice, this is something that seems very unusual or unfamiliar. Sethe happily agreed to marry Hallie, and then was stuck, not knowing the next step. There should be a ceremony, shouldn't there? A preacher, some dancing, a party, something. She's not really quite sure what to think about or what to ask for. She and Mrs. Garner, the wife of the enslaver, were the only women there. So she decided to ask her. Hallie and me want to be married, Mrs. Garner. So I heard, she smiled. He talked to Mr. Garner about it. Are you already expecting? So the assumption is that this is related to pregnancy and childbirth and not to choice again. No, ma'am. Well, you will be. You know that, don't you? Yes, ma'am. Hallie's nice, Sethe. He'll be good to you. But I mean, we want to get married. You just said so, and I said, all right. Is there a wedding? And so this is a joke. And Mrs. Garner is shown to be benevolent, but she's also shown to be, sorry about this. I think it's the recorder that's messed up a little bit. She pats her on the head and says, "You are one sweet child," and then no more. So they had to kind of do it, on the sly. She makes a dress, and, they kind of, find ways to be intimate together. They think no one can see them, except for the fact that the corn in which they are sleeping together is visible as it's moving around. Of course, as you remember from the rest of this reading, all of the Pauls, who live with them, and Sixo and brother, they've all been wanting to be with a woman so very much, and so the fact that, they couldn't was incredibly frustrating for them. So when Paul D comes to see Setha, it's a big deal for him. Anyway, so what, one way that you could write about, for example, masculinity when it comes to the novel Beloved is to look at how it makes things we take for granted seem very unusual, and makes things that sound kind of shocking seem ordinary, and how that helps us to understand some of the gaps between past and present that are hard to really put into words, that are difficult to understand, and that literature really helps us to access the past. Thank you so much for listening to this. I hope this was helpful to you. Take care.